Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is George Herrera with the Queens Home Team at Keller Williams Realty. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the most common inspection issues that we come across specifically here in Queens. Now, this won't cover every inspection issue that we come across, but I just made a list of the most common ones that we encounter and also want to give you our insight in terms of how they're usually handled and how you as a home buyer or a homeowner might want to handle these issues if they ever come up during a real estate transaction that you're a part of. So first thing, most common inspection problems in Queens, New York. Number one, and this is in no particular order for this whole list, but number one I have is old roof. Now, when you do an inspection or even when you go to view a property, or if you're an owner, when a buyer comes to view your property, they see the house, they see visibly everything they can see, but one thing that most buyers will not know about is the age of a roof. You can't really tell the age of a roof when you come to a preview. Many times you don't even get access to the roof to see it, so the age of the roof is unknown. Once the inspection is done, then the home inspector will usually tell the buyer what the estimated ages of the roof. You can always ask the listing agent, who can ask the seller, and the seller can give you any insight if they know. But if they don't know, your inspector will always be able to tell you whether that roof still has a good lifespan left in it, or if that roof needs to be replaced sometime soon. So when this issue comes up, what an owner has to be prepared for is if a roof is at the end of its life, meaning it's a 30-year roof and it's been 25 years used, so maybe it's at the end of its life. Within the next 3 or 5 years, that roof is going to need to be replaced. If it's a shingle roof and it has 3 layers already, then you know that it's towards the end of its lifespan. If it's a flat roof, you can usually visibly tell, the inspector will be able to tell if that roof is in good condition or not, or if it needs to be replaced or recoated. So the roof, if it's at the end of its life, then a seller should be prepared to offer a credit to the buyer, because it's something that's unknown. It's not something that the buyer was aware of. So even if you say we're selling the house as is, if they're standard representations, if it's a standard sale, a buyer will now be surprised with this added expense. They didn't know that they would need to replace this roof within the next 2 or 3 years. So now that's a new expense that they have to take into consideration. So it usually makes sense to just offer some type of credit in lieu of that. So old roof is definitely something that comes up, and usually it's handled in the form of a credit. We don't ever recommend our sellers to replace a roof for a buyer, so usually it's handled in the form of a credit. Number two I have is an old boiler. Similar to an old roof, you can have a house where even though the heat's all working, everything is in working order, the boiler can be at the end of its life. And homeowners don't always know. Sometimes they might know how old the boiler is, but your inspector, again, this is the trained eye, so he'll go in, he'll look at it. Many times they open the boiler, look at the serial number. They'll actually research the serial number so that they can see the exact age of that boiler. And if the boiler is towards the end of its life, then the inspector will most likely recommend that you might want to replace this boiler, or you might need to replace this boiler within the next, let's say, 1 to 5 years. So in the near future. This also can be an unexpected expense that the buyer has to consider, right? So when they're looking at the property, they're looking at everything visually, but they're not inspecting it like an inspector would. So when they see the boiler room, they just see the boiler room, they see a boiler, and they assume that everything's working, but they don't actually know the age of it. So whenever this comes up, an old boiler at the end of its life, it can come up where a buyer now wants a credit in lieu of that. Again, we never recommend for our sellers to replace a boiler or anything like that. It could be working, but if it is at the end of its life, then it usually makes sense to come to a win-win agreement with the buyer and offer some type of credit in lieu of that. Okay, so unless you know that it's really old, you disclose it up front, then it was known. But if it's something unexpected that comes up and now the buyer is aware that or is notified that it's a boiler at the very end of its life, then usually it is handled in the form of a credit for that item. Number 3 is asbestos. So here in Queens, what's common that you'll see is asbestos tiles in a basement. That's pretty common. Those are the 8x8 tiles that they used to use back in the day. You also can see asbestos wrap piping. So in the basement, usually in the boiler room, but it can also be running through the whole basement, asbestos wrap piping. So that's also very common. Now, when this comes up, it would be the inspector usually that notifies the buyer. This is, just so you know, these are asbestos tiles, or this is asbestos wrap piping. If it's crumbling, it can be very hazardous, so it can be very dangerous, and they can recommend for the buyer to have that abated, so to have actually asbestos abatement done, to have it removed. And so with asbestos, it doesn't always come up depending on where it is in terms of an issue, right? So if it's crumbling, that's when they say it's dangerous. If the tiles are crumbling, if it's intact, the inspector might give the buyer some different options, but this is something that can come up, and a buyer might bring up the issue of asbestos, meaning asbestos tiles. It could be asbestos wrap piping, and the way that's usually handled, it depends. It depends on this one. So there can be asbestos abatement done, which most sellers don't opt to go that route. Usually they'll prefer to just give a credit, and then the buyer can take care of that after closing. But it's not uncommon either for a homeowner to agree to have it abated, and they can have the asbestos abatement done by a professional company, and then that's shared with the buyer's attorney, so they have the receipt and the proof that it was done. But asbestos is not as common because a lot of it has been removed from many homes, but every once in a while we do see areas where there's asbestos tiles or asbestos wrap piping. Sometimes you'll see it. So let's say if it's with asbestos wrap piping, what they typically say is that it's dangerous if it's in a living area. So let's say you have asbestos wrap piping only in the boiler room and it's not crumbling, it's all intact, then actually the level of danger or say hazard that presents is not as much, because people aren't going to be spending a lot of time in the boiler room, right? And it's intact there. So where it becomes more of a concern is where if you have asbestos wrap piping, let's say throughout a finished basement, or in a room that someone sleeps in, or in a room that someone spends time in, then it can be more a cause for concern. And usually this one is handled by either a credit, or if the seller's willing to, they can actually have the abatement done. But that's something else that's not so common, but it can be come up during inspections in Queens. Number 4 I have is active leak or signs of moisture. This is very common actually. So if you're doing an inspection, your inspector usually will have a moisture reader, and they use that as they go through the house. And then if there's any signs that looks like there was water damage, or that it looks like there is water damage, they usually go up to with the moisture reader and they check what the moisture level is. This is very common where it can be something old and it was taken care of. It was maybe an old leak or old water spots, but it's not anything active, and the moisture reader will come out dry, and the inspector will let the buyer know. But on occasion they'll read it and it'll show high levels of moisture, meaning it could be something active. And usually for something like that, anything water related, leak related, usually will result in the owner repairing it or having it looked at, having it taken care of. Because in any standard real estate contract in Queens, it will state that the house will be delivered in working order, with all major components in working order, and delivered free and clear of any leaks. So if there's any water intrusion or any leaks of any kind, then that will usually fall on the seller to actually have it looked at and have it taken care of. So for something like that, usually it would be taken care of by the owner, unless for some reason they just are not willing to do that. then they can offer a credit, and it's up to the buyer if the buyer is actually willing to take that credit. So it can be resolved also with a credit, but many times those kind of things actually, at least for our listings and our sellers, we actually have them taken care of so that there's no active leaks when we deliver the property after closing. All right, now the other one is number 5. I have cracks on foundation walls. This is also pretty common. These are old homes. These are sometimes over 100-year-old homes in Queens. So the inspector will go through whenever they see large cracks in the foundation or large cracks on retaining walls or on structural walls. They will mention that to the buyer, and they have the trained eye, so they'll be able to tell whether this is something that could pose a problem or whether it's something that's common, just settlement over time. So the inspector would be able to give some insight there. The way these are usually handled, if this becomes an issue, is usually through a credit. If the buyer's still willing to move forward, usually handled through a credit. We've never had our sellers do any structural repair work or any type of work on to that degree. If that ever comes up, you know, that's just how the house is. It's up to the buyer if they wish to proceed. But what it can be, there can be a credit offered in lieu of that because nobody knew. And if it is something that could pose a bigger expense for the buyer after they close, then it makes sense to try to find a win-win agreement and maybe offer a credit for that. All right, so number 6 I have is termites. Termites are very common here in Queens, especially with frame homes. They're built of wood, and many times the inspectors will go in and it's very easily visible to the inspector if there's termite damage in the home, because they can usually tell from the beams and any exposed wood that they have access to. They can see whether there's signs of termite damage in the property. Many times it's in the garage too. You might have termite damage in the garage. You'll have termite damage maybe in the basement where they notice. But this is very common. If this ever comes up, it does fall on the seller to have the termites treated. So you just get a pest control company, they come in, they treat for the termites, and then they usually offer a 1-year warranty that the owner can then transfer over to the buyer. We provide that to the buyer's attorney, and they have that, and that's taken care of. The reason this falls on the seller is because banks will require for termites to be treated in order for the loan to be approved as part of the mortgage process. The banks will require for termite treatment to be done. So this usually falls on the owner to have it taken care of. So whenever it comes up on any of our listings, we just recommend a few of our preferred pest control companies that we work with, and then they have the termites treated and they provide the warranty to transfer over to the buyer. But this one is pretty common for Queens. All right, number 7 I have is report complexity. So what does that mean? A very common issue in Queens is that buyers just aren't ready. They just aren't prepared for what an inspection report entails and what it looks like. So the best thing to do is to prepare the buyer, whether you're an agent or whether you're the seller, listing agent, whatever the case is. What's required here is preparation in the buyer to be mentally prepared of what they're going to receive. When you get an inspection report, obviously a home inspector, their job is to point out every little thing that's wrong with the house. You know, they err on the side of caution, so they will point out every little thing. And that report can be very lengthy. It can be a very thick report if you were to print it, right? And it's going to have every single nook and cranny of the home, every little thing that's wrong. That's not meant to alarm a buyer. It's really should just be used for informational purposes. We always tell people the inspection report is going to have everything, and what you use it as is as a checklist. You can use it as a to-do list. Over the years, you tackle little projects one at a time. So you tackle all those items in that inspection report, as many as you can. But it's very common that the complexity of the report can scare some buyers and they can back out. Sometimes they can get a little too scared, or they'll be unreasonable with the requests that they make because there's so many things that are in the report. So the way you resolve this, or the way you address it, is try to prepare buyers before they get their report, before the inspection. And we always let people know that with the inspection is for informational purposes. And for our listings, at least, we never negotiate for normal wear and tear. So normal wear and tear, we don't negotiate anything. That's just the normal wear and tear of a home. If anything unexpected comes up that nobody was aware of. So like I mentioned, a boiler being at the end of its life, active moisture coming into the home via a leak or through the wall or something like that, or heating not working in a room, or anything like that, a roof at the end of its life, things like that that nobody knew about and now everyone is aware. Those, we usually say it makes sense to find a win-win agreement and keep the deal moving forward. And usually that can be handled through a credit, through a repair, through credit and repairs, whatever the case is. But it makes sense to try to come to a new agreement when it's something that nobody was aware of. But normal wear and tear, never negotiated. So now, number 8 is the cost and who pays. So this is something that does come up where you'll get some people that the things come. We've had some inspectors that actually quote prices to buyers, and I don't know why they do that, because they're not contractors, so they really shouldn't quote prices. But sometimes that can become an issue where something comes up and now the question is, how much will it cost, right? But if you have a good agent, a good listing agent will know the estimated cost of many repairs. So like, for example, my wife and I, we own in Astoria, we own investment properties also. We do renovation work pretty much every year. We're doing projects on one of our properties. So we're very familiar with the costs of many different projects and many different repairs. So it helps if your agent knows what the estimated cost should be for certain repairs, and that allows you to negotiate better when you are negotiating credits. Sometimes we get buyers who are making unreasonable requests and maybe saying something outlandish, it's going to cost me, $50,000 to replace the roof, when we know that's not the case, right? So it does help to know the cost of certain repairs, and this can be an issue where what the buyer thinks the cost will be for a repair or for some type of issue is different than what the owner thinks the cost will be. So it does help to be able to find common ground there on the cost, and a good listing agent will be able to negotiate that because they'll be able to know a lot of the realistic costs for certain repairs or replacements for things. But costs and who pays, for us, at least, with our listings, we don't typically like to have our owners actually do repairs and make replacements, because you can do something and then the buyer might not be happy with it, and now you're back to a renegotiation. So many times it's easier to just offer the credit or a discount in the price, and it's just a matter of figuring out what that amount should be, right? But costs and who pays, that's another one. Number 9 is the timetable for repairs. So if repairs are to be done, this can be an issue that comes up. When will it be done? Who's going to do it, right? But as long as you're using the right people, you should be all set there. And many times the timetable will be by closing. So here in Queens, we don't do repairs and verify everything before contracts are signed or anything like that. Usually it's negotiated. If a seller agrees to make a repair, then it goes in the contract that will be repaired by closing. And then as long as it's done by closing, then everything is all good. But this could be sometimes something that comes up, is just what the repairs are going to be, whether the owner's going to do them, who will do them, and by when will they be done. But that one is not so big of an issue, because once you come to an agreement on a repair, and if the owner agrees to make a certain repair, then usually it's just going to be done by closing. That's usually the timetable. So last one, number 10, most common home inspection issue here in Queens is an unreasonable buyer or an unreasonable seller. This is unfortunately very common, where you can have a home inspection done and the buyer could be unreasonable with their requests, what they're asking for. Like I said, we've had buyers who end up giving us a laundry list of items that they expect to be repaired. And that's just not going to happen. That's for normal wear and tear items, things like that. You just can't expect for a seller to be repairing all those things for you. And if it comes to a credit or a discount, you also have to be reasonable. Remember, these properties are priced in according to their condition. So if you get an inspection report back, you have an agreement, and then you want to knock $100,000 off of the price because of what you got in the inspection report, chances are your deal's gonna die, because that's very unreasonable. You have to be reasonable with the requests you make. And our advice is always, especially if you're a buyer, when you make requests, your request should be able to be itemized, and you should be able to justify why you're requesting the amount you're requesting as a credit or as a discount. And that just makes it come across more fair. It makes it more of a reasonable way to ask for a credit or a discount, because at least you're justifying the amounts and with each item. But unreasonable buyer can always kill a deal, and an unreasonable seller also. So if you have a seller who now the buyer just became aware that the roof has to be completely replaced within the next year, and the boiler is at the end of its life, and the boiler needs to be replaced. And if a homeowner doesn't want to budge and offer anything, a deal can very easily die there. And it is unreasonable in that scenario, because nobody knew about it. Nobody knew that the roof was at the end of its life, the boiler was at the end of its life, and now the new homeowner, the buyer, has this unexpected big expense that they will have to take on in the near future. So it makes sense to be understanding of that situation, put yourself in the buyer's shoes, and then make a reasonable consideration in terms of what credit you'd be willing to offer. It just makes sense and works towards what we always say, which is a win-win agreement. It has to be a win-win. When someone stands too firm and doesn't want to budge, many times that can lead to a contract being canceled, or to a inspection or an accepted offer falling through. So unreasonable buyer or seller, if you're a homeowner or a home buyer and you're going forward, just always remember to be reasonable with any requests or any negotiations, and also strive to always find the win-win agreement. That's the key. After inspection, if something comes up, if there's issues to be addressed, make sure you're working towards a win-win, and make sure you're being reasonable with your requests. And then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to keep that deal moving forward and going on into contract. All right, so that's my 10 most common home inspection issues that we come across here in Queens, in no particular order. There's obviously more things that come up, but that's what I came up with here. These 10. If you have any questions about home inspections, issues that come up, questions on how to negotiate items that come up in an inspection, feel free to reach out to us anytime. You can see the link below in the description also to visit our website if you have any questions. All right. Thanks as always for tuning in, y'all. Stay tuned for the next episode. Take care. Have a great day.